Hello, and welcome to Finsweet Live. We're here Bill Day, Friday, 9 Eastern, and we're joined by Alex Iglesias, Finsweet's CTO. Today, we are talking about using JavaScript frameworks on a Webflow website. Alex, how you doing?
I'm great. Hey, everyone.
Great.
Hello.
This is a really nice episode because sometimes we have to write a little bit of code on top of a Webflow site. Right? Sometimes we can work natively, sometimes we can work with little scripts, and sometimes we have to build a whole application with code. Right? You don't really want to use no code tools for certain use cases. So for a lot of our larger clients with complex use cases, we're always integrating frameworks. Our framework of choice is Svelte. We will be covering that on this stream. But Alex is going to talk about frameworks in general. Really nice technical episode for those people who want to write code and also take that to the next level. Before we get too far into it, I will say State of Flow is happening right now, or in a
Hey.
few hours. The first day I am in St. Petersburg, Florida. Very excited. Last night we had the sponsors dinner and it was great. So Reimar, Colleen, the planning committee already off to a wonderful start. Going to be a great event. If you're going to be there and you're in this chat, let me know. I will see you in a few hours. Also, before we start, one more thing. Nelson reached out to me asking me to share the speed build challenge link. Nelson is a community hero, a community legend. He helps so many people adopt this platform. So anytime Nelson asks me to do something, it is a yes. And that's why I'm sharing this Speed Build Challenge 2022 link in the chat. Please check that out. If you are interested, even in the slightest bit, fill it out. Go for it. It's going to be a great learning experience and a great community experience for anybody involved. But not too many more announcements because we need to get down to technical. We only have 57 minutes left, and every single minute is important. So, Alex, please take it away. Let's hear how we integrate JavaScript frameworks into Webflow.
Nice. Okay, so let me start by just pointing out that as Svelte is the framework of our choice, but it's specifically for building applications that are not strictly related to Webflow. I mean, the end purpose is for Webflow, but and it's not usually for Webflow projects. There is a reason behind that, and I think that we can reach the conclusion so people can understand that to the end of the stream. Because what I would like to do today is to present different ways of integrating JavaScript frameworks on the sites. Well, first, we can start by differentiating different types of frameworks because not all of them are the same thing. And after that, we can see, some pros and cons of every single option that we have out there. And if I have some time, maybe we can read some conclusions about why do we things like we do in Finsweet and what are our actual future plans for that. Maybe we can, throw some hype to the people later. Okay, so let's start with the most basic question, like how do I use a JavaScript framework? Or perhaps we could just define like what is a JavaScript framework maybe, you know? Um, for non-technical people and as somebody who has never heard about the term framework, JavaScript framework, think of imagine that you're building things from scratch every single time. You're trying to build complex applications, but every single time that you try to build something, you find yourself doing things over and over again. You know, like making making an element, update the text content of that element because of something changed on the state of the application, tracking the state of the application, triggering actions, different things that you usually need to implement in an application. And if you do it from scratch, you tend to write some code that you can reuse for that. And next time you notice you build a framework yourself, because you need to, instead of repeating again and again your stuff, you need to reuse your code in some way. So JavaScript frameworks that are like that, they're just guidelines and tools that are helping you to build complex applications, and they give you already the path for that. You just need to follow the path and create your own things on top of it. So this way, usually when building complex applications, people don't go and try to build everything with vanilla JavaScript, because that would be pretty complex. Instead, what they rely on is just some of these frameworks that provide half of the way, half of the work for you already, and then you just can pick that up and start creating your own things. So there are many JavaScript frameworks. Most of the people probably has heard of React, Vue, Svelte, things like that. These are very common names, but not all of them are the exact same thing. Every single framework usually has its own problem that they're trying to solve. It's not like people are just reinventing the wheel because they can. And it happens a lot, but usually when a framework it's born, it's because it's solving specific some specific pain points, something that is providing something new to the ecosystem. But I like to classify everything in just three main categories, so people can have some mind map about them. And I'll just do this. I'm guessing that everyone can see my screen, so let's just do some drawing. I feel like a teacher here. Love it. This would be I would like to say progressive enhancement, and we need to make this a little bit smaller. How to do this? Like that. Okay. Let's do it the other way around, like that. So we have the progressive enhancement frameworks. We had, let me define the first three of them, and then I'll just give you a brief on all of them. And we have the UI frameworks, like that. And then lastly, we have the meta frameworks. Okay, so let's see what's the difference between these three. Okay, progressive enhancement, kind of the word kind of says it. The main target of these frameworks, it's just picking something that already exists. So imagine, for example, a Webflow site. This usually a static site. It is something that already exists, and you want to just enhance that a little bit by just sprinkling some bits of functionality on top of something that already exists. So that's why it's called progressive enhancement, because you're taking something and you're just enhancing it progressively. um, then we have and let me just put a couple examples here. Progressive enhancement, that could be, for example, Petit View, is one of them. And another one would be, for example, Pine.js. Both of the frameworks, they are kind of similar. They work by just sprinkling some attributes on top of your code, and then you have already some interactivity built on them. We will see that in a second, because I'm planning to walk you through an example with this. Then we jump another level and we go to the UI frameworks. And the UI frameworks, again, the name it's saying, kind of already saying what they do. It's they manage, they create entire UIs. So instead of taking something that already exists and enhance it, they generate the entire UI themselves. This has a bunch of benefits, like all the interactivity of the framework. It's fully managed by it, rendering the elements, all the performance regarding managing the DOM. It's completely relied on the framework. And this category, it's the one that most people knows, because in here these would fall React, for example, and also Vue, Svelte, Angular, all of this. Svelte, Vue, let me just write them here so everyone can see them. Svelte, Vue, Angular, all of these have one thing in common, and is that they generate the UI for you. So instead of you creating an HTML file, a CSS file, and then adding JavaScript on top of that, these UI frameworks manage everything for you. You just create framework components. These are component-based frameworks, and these components, they create the HTML, they add the CSS styles for you, and they add the JavaScript. They do everything for you. Okay. And the last thing, when we go another level up, it's the meta frameworks. And this is kind of like an evolution of the UI frameworks, in a sense that the UI frameworks, they just care about what's happening on the client. So you load in a blank HTML file, for example, and the UI framework on the client will manage picking all the logic, generating the DOM elements, rendering them on the page, adding the interactivity. They will do all of that on the page. But the meta frameworks, they go step farther, and they can generate everything on the server. So they are like this last level of when you need a full control of your application, what's happening on the server and then what's happening on the client. Everything comes together with a meta framework. And in this case, probably people has heard of them, because all of them, all of the UI frameworks, they have a meta framework. This is something that is pretty popular nowadays. For example, React, they have Next.js, and they don't have it, but these frameworks exist based on React. It's not like this is part of React. This is a different team. Next.js or Remix. Remix is also a meta framework of React. In case of Svelte, there's something that's called SvelteKit. In this case, it is part of the Svelte team. From Vue, they have Next.js, like that. And Angular, I think that there is no meta framework for Angular, but maybe I'm wrong. So if somebody knows about a meta framework, just let us know in the comments. So these are the three main categories. Obviously, if you think of it, this last section in here, this last category, it doesn't make much sense in the Webflow ecosystem, because we're already starting from a platform that generates the HTML and CSS for us. We don't have any control of the backend of what's going on when requesting assets to the server. So in that case, a meta framework, it's something that it's not for us. It's not when working strictly when working in Webflow. If you have to build an application for any Webflow use case, perhaps that's another thing. But when building, a Webflow project, something that needs interactivity, in that case, meta frameworks is not it's not something that we can use. So we are left with these two options, and I would like to, instead of just talking about this and letting people imagine what's going on, I think that the best thing we can do, it's just learn by doing. Right? We can just set up a project and see what people understand. If people sees the value behind them.
Can we jump into one
Yeah.
question?
Any
This is
questions?
from
Yeah, go
Sam
ahead.
Harrison, and I think a lot of people have this same question. Sam Harrison says, interesting. Currently diving into JS, particularly Vue.js. Any particular reason for Svelte over React over Vue? So this UI frameworks column, can you just give a short explanation of why you would choose one over the other?
This is a complete topic, but okay, I'll do my best. So the main the React is the one that everyone knows. It was one of the first. It was not the first one behind before React. There were others, like I think it was called Meteor. It was a Meteor framework, but the Ember is still there. Inferno also exists. There have been other frameworks. React was the first one who became popular because they started to use something that is called the virtual DOM. So what it does, um, React what it does is it starts with a JSX template. JSX is a templating language that was specifically created by React. So instead of coding with JavaScript, you're using kind of like a different language that resembles JavaScript, but it's made specifically for React. And React has this virtual DOM, which in the memory, in the background, what it's doing, it's generating the UI, and then every single time that something changes, it's first replicating everything inside a virtual DOM that it's called. So it's like a shadow. You have what you're showing to the people, and then you have that shadow of it. And first you update everything. You can track all the changes in the shadow of that. And once you're happy with everything that happened, you move the shadow to the light. I think that it was a horrendous description, but the brittle DOM, it's just this. Svelte, for example, on the other hand, it was a framework that was born with a different mindset. React, everything that you create in React, you're shipping it to the browser. So you're shipping the React library. You're shipping once you transpile the JSX files, you're shipping all the raw logic of the framework down to the user. And this virtual DOM, it's run on the user's browser. Svelte, for example, has another approach. In Svelte, it's a compiler. Svelte takes a different approach in a sense that instead of relying on tracking all the changes on the browser of the user, they manage to compile all the logic beforehand in the developer's computer, and then they just create an optimized version of the JavaScript that needs to run on the users. Also, Svelte has its own templating system. It has its own. It's not a language per se because they use raw JavaScript, but they have some directives that are specific to Svelte. Reactivity also works differently. Svelte, I feel that if I start going this rabbit hole, I will never end. But
Yeah,
okay,
and
how can I
you know,
summarize everything? Go ahead.
can
Sorry.
you maybe let's give a quick example of why you would want to use one over the other. So would it have to be based on complexity of the application? Is this a pure preference thing? Is one more
Preference, I
performant
would
or more
say.
powerful than the other? Okay, preference.
So, for example, yeah, there's people who always have preference for React because React is the one that everyone uses. So it's kind of like the WordPress of the
Sure.
web, and Svelte could be kind of like the Webflow of the web. It takes a different approach. It's a little bit more
Nice.
performant, and it's more opinionated. I understand that people cannot like it. For example, I'm a huge fan of it. um so for example, React would be, it's not the most performant, it's not the most clever, it's not the most developer friendly, it's just the most used. And it was the base for everything that's going on today. For example, today, nowadays there's an alternative. If you like React, there's an alternative that it's called Solid.js, that it's very similar to React, but solves a lot of the pain points that React, a lot of the overheads that React introduced, with all the hook systems and all the ins and outs that you need to know about side effects when using some APIs of React. Solid.js just simplified everything, got rid of the virtual DOM, made everything simpler. So it's just like an evolution of it. Svelte also, it's more performant. I prefer it because the language is very simple to learn. It's compiled. Out of the box, you have a lot of things that are optimized by the framework. Vue, it's also another framework that it's very simple to learn. So it has a learning curve that it's quite the opposite of steep. Right now, I don't know the word. Soft, maybe that's the word.
Nice.
And they're also moving towards no virtual DOM. Currently, they do have virtual DOM, but they have plans for not using it. Angular, for example, it's like a full blown set of tools. It has a lot of things built in, which was really great when it first came out. But right now, I would say that most of the frameworks have become way better than Angular, both in performance, size, way of handling things, developer experience, everything. So it's very hard. I think that this just it's based off preference, specifically for the outcome, like performance, the experience that you get when developing with them, and also the market. Because I understand that if people wants to find a job, most of people wants always to just learn React because there's more market for it. No shame on that. So conclusion, it's up to you. Every framework has its benefits. Every framework has its cons. At the end of the day, it's just you picking whatever you feel happy working with it. And also, one thing that I like to say is I don't consider myself, a Svelte developer. You know, people often says like I'm a React developer, things like that. I work with Svelte a lot, but I'm not a Svelte developer. I'm a JavaScript developer. And this means that I have enough JavaScript knowledge to pick up any framework and work with it if I need to. It's not like, okay, I know Svelte, but I don't know React. I cannot work. That's not how it works. If you know JavaScript, you know the basis of reactive UI frameworks. You have 70% of the job of the work done. The rest of it is just learning a little bit of the tool and just having experience with it. But that's it. Nothing special.
That was a
But
nice overview. I think that does answer the question well. So
I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
let's bring up a comment from Sammy here, which I think
Yep.
really mirrors what you said. There's no such thing as this framework is better than that one. Each framework has its own features, its ecosystem, and learning curve. So yeah, that's
Correct.
it's not better or worse. It's all preference based. But if you want to have the same preference as Alex, go with Svelte. If you want to keep learning a lot of the things that we're teaching at Finsweet, if you want to keep following these technical streams, if you want to see what Alex is working on for more Svelte and Webflow connection, start there. I don't know much about this, but if I were to go and learn something just based on what Alex does and what he teaches us at Finsweet, I'm going Svelte. So let's now continue. This was now the overview part of the show, and now let's bring up this comment from Nick the Martin, the Martian. How do we manage a project where the page styles are handled in Webflow, but the interactivity is controlled by a UI framework? That's exactly what the next part of this episode is all about. And
Yep.
quick disclaimer, we've had a couple of weird YouTube live streaming issues the past few streams. We don't know what it is. We think it's something on the YouTube side. But if this stream starts to lag or stop or whatever, just know that the recording happens perfectly. So you can always come back, wait a little bit, and this stream will be perfect even if the live is buffering a little bit. So now let's get into it. Alex, show us how we can now integrate a UI framework with Webflow.
Nice. Yeah. By the way, just a small because I'm seeing a lot of recurring comments about GZEP all the time. We should plan a stream specific for that because I'm seeing a lot of interest of people. So okay, we'll answer anything that we can about GZEP and animations on the web, perhaps on a dedicated stream for that. Cool. And let's jump into building something. Cool. Um, I've I've done a little bit of homework myself first, and I've created this very cool. You can see I'm a great designer UI, where we want to add a bunch of reactivity. So let's just define what we want to happen with this UI. Okay, um, we have a counter and we have two buttons. We just want to increment or decrement this counter whenever we click on them. And if the count goes up, let's say more than 5 or more than 10, we want to, show this disclaimer to this warning to the user, like, this is too much, please stop. Okay, very basic. It's super simple, but it will help us to show you how can you, instead of building this with vanilla JavaScript, which would be pretty simple. Let's not lie. This is not complex at all. But the reason why we're using frameworks is when we need to build something that it's way more complex. For something that it's just a couple lines of code, it doesn't make sense. But for something that it would be not only this counter, but also many more other bits of interactivity on the side, maybe then it's a use case for it. But let's just do this. Let's just build this. I would like to. We have 35 minutes, so I would like to, if I have enough time, to do an example for both of them, for the UI frameworks and for the progressive enhancement frameworks. Um, let's start with the UI frameworks because there was a question about that, and also because then you will appreciate how best of a solution it's probably one of these frameworks for a Webflow project, but you'll see later. Let's start
And
with a UI framework. Go ahead.
can we do a quick question? 3 people asked the same question, but
Go
we'll
ahead.
keep the answer short here. Can you
Go
integrate
ahead.
multiple frameworks at the same time, or do you want to pick just
Yes.
one framework? Okay, so that's okay to do. You can use React and you can
Yep.
use Svelte on the same project.
Yep.
Okay,
You.
that's the answer.
Yeah. What? Let me. Because one of the things that it's good to have in mind is that these UI frameworks, at the end of the day, the only thing that they are doing is creating bits of JavaScript for you. So you're just coding, the directions, and the framework packs everything with the logic enough to run on the website. This is the same as having multiple scripts. You could have a script with some logic that's built on Svelte, that's fine. And then you could have a script that with some logic that's built with Vue, that's also fine. It's not an issue at all. Obviously, in terms of maintenance and scalability, you probably want to, unify everything so everyone in the team has some clear direction and you don't start because of having an unorganized code base. But it's possible. At the end of the day, it's just JavaScript snippets that are running on the browser, so that's fine. Okay, so I said that I'm a big fan of Svelte, so obviously I'm going to build this using Svelte. But if you want to try it with React, with Vue, Angular, Solid.js, any other framework, it's the same. It's mostly it's the same approach. Obviously, every framework has its different ways of setting it up and mounting it and doing all the work, but the process it's kind of the same. Okay, so let's start with Svelte. So let's go here, Svelte. I'll zoom in a lot, and we have here some directions on how to create a new Svelte application. Okay, and in this case, so I'll just run this template Svelte. Let me copy and paste this. I already have a directory that's ready for this, and I'll just paste this. I want this to be run on, let's say, oh, we'll just do it here, like that. And we'll just follow the directions. We want a spell project with TypeScript. Why not? Cool. And we already have everything ready and set up. The first thing that you will notice is because these UI frameworks are meant for managing the entire UI for you, they are expecting you to build, with your own index.html file, managing every single thing, you know. But in our case, what we want to do is we want to have the Webflow site, And maybe on the Webflow side, we want to have different things, and let me just make it clear. Let's move this out of the application like that. Why not? Let's put also doing some rearrangements now, but I think it should be fine. Container, everything inside like that. Now I just broke everything, but I think that you kind of see that what we want to do is we want to preserve the site of the page that contains the page wrapper, the global styles, the main wrapper, the container, some title. And inside the application wrapper, it's where we want to mount the application. So we don't want the UI framework to manage everything, although we could. In this case, what we want to do is just focus on a specific place of our site, and you'll see that in a second. Okay, just for the sake of not breaking what I had prepared, I'll just reverse everything to before. And in this case, let's just inspect for a second what's going on here. We have an application, Svelte application. I don't. This stream is not meant for teaching you about Svelte. Just also, I need to install everything. But we have an application that already injects some main and divs and links and has a counter and also some descriptions. And if we run this, I think that we can run it like that. If we run this, we will see, a pre-made template with some interactivity on it. This is just a template application using Svelte. But what we want to do is we want to pick this UI, dump it into Svelte components, and then pack a Svelte application that we can run on this page. So that's what we will do. The first thing that I will do is let's just clone this and let's say Svelte like that. We can publish that and we can start. So let's inspect the application. What happens is it's taking the application.svelte component, because everything is a component in the component UI frameworks, and it's just mounting this app component on a target element that has an ID that's called app application app like that. So we can do the same. We can just, let me show you this. We can just take this UI, and you can see that I did some homework and I already added some app ID here because I just followed the same, but it could be another ID, whatever. And what we want to do is take this HTML and put it inside the framework. So let's just go ahead and do it. I'll just take all of this. I'll take everything. The reason for that, I'll explain in a second. But I'll take everything like that. And I'll just put it here in the entry file. Can I zoom out one, or maybe it will be too small? How about now?
You can zoom out if you need to. I prefer the zoom in. I'll never ask to zoom
I
out,
know.
but if you need to, go
Okay.
for it.
Okay. Okay. Let me, the audience, please let me know if this is too small for you, because otherwise it's like I don't see what the hell am I doing. So what I've done right now is just I took the HTML and I dumped everything inside the entry file here. The reason it's just because of development. That's it. Because when developing, this framework, it's meant for using everything in this index.js file. So I'm just simulating the Webflow site in this index.html. And what we want to do now is take the application code, which was this. You can see it here that we have the app ID. I mean, the app ID here. I'll just take this and I'll move it. Sorry, the inside of the app like that. I'll just take this and I'll move it into the application like that. Cool. Okay. You'll see in a second what I just did. But right now, what we've done is we've just moved the global styles because of development purposes. We want to have the global styles here. I've moved the wrapper of the application, and I just left the target where we want to mount the application, which is this div with an ID that's called app. Because then when running the application, it will look for an element that has an ID that's app, and it will mount the component that's called app. Same, simple as that. And this app component, for now, it doesn't have any logic, but it already contains my HTML. So if we go to the page here, see what happened. We have the HTML already in place, but the styles are not looking quite right. Right? What happens is that we also need to use the CSS styles from Webflow, and for development purposes, we need them in our project too. So what I'll do is I'll just take all the CSS. So I just inspect the page source code. I'll go to the CSS file and I'll take everything, and I'll just dump it here. And stay with me. I know that this might be confusing, but you'll see why in a second. Okay, cool. So now we have our own project with everything, but keep in mind that this is right now running locally. So this is not the Webflow site. This is running on my 127.0.0.1, which is localhost. Okay. Our goal right now is to just create the logic of the app, bundle everything together, and then instead of using this index.html file that I'm using here for development, we will just use the Webflow site. So we will load the application on the Webflow HTML and CSS instead of the HTML that the framework expects to use. We're kind of hijacking a little bit the framework. It's not the best experience, but this is what we have. So let's just add some interactivity to this. And the way that it works in Svelte, I'll just open a script and I'll put it in TypeScript just because I want to. And we'll say that a count is equals to 0. And then we can replace this count here for the variable that is already reactive, that it's called count. And we have a couple buttons here. The first button, let me just clear this out. Let's just put some comments. So here is the count. And here we have the buttons. And here we have the warning, like that. So what we want to do is when we click the increment button, we want to increment the count. And when we click the decrement button, we want to decrement the count. So we'll do that. We will just create a function that will be increment like that. And this essentially just sums the count plus 1. And we'll do another function for decrement like that. And it just minus 1. Oh, we have the functions. Very simple. We'll just take these buttons and we'll say that on click, decrement like that, and on click, oops, increment like that. Okay, we have the logic. Everything should be working as expected. So you can see already that the difference between these JavaScript frameworks and doing things vanilla is that they kind of abstract away most of the logic for querying a DOM element, tracking the state of a variable, updating the variable, and then when the variable updates, updating the DOM with it. They're just doing everything for you. But at the same time, what they are doing is they are rendering this HTML for you. If we inspect the code here, we will see that this HTML does not exist. This is not included in the HTML file. The HTML that you see here, all of these elements are being rendered by the JavaScript framework when the page loads. This is very important because this affects SEO. This can affect SEO. Just keep that in mind. Okay, let's just add one extra bit, and we'll say that this warning should only be displayed when the count is greater than 5, like that. In Svelte, we have this templating directive that's called if, and as defined, it will only show whenever the count is greater than 5. Cool. Okay, we have an application. Done. That's it. Very simple. But what we want to do now is move all of this to the Webflow side, right? We don't want to be, for development, it's cool to do it like that because you have auto refresh, everything just loads super fast. You don't need to think about anything. But when we want to move to production, we need to put this code in the Webflow side, right? So let's define what we need to do. The first thing is that we need to get rid of all of this. I've just got rid of it. Why? Because again, the UI framework will be the one in charge of rendering the HTML. And we already defined the HTML here in the application. So what we're doing is just keeping the app wrapper with the app ID. Remember that we are using this ID to mount the application. So we have here new application, and the target is some element that has an ID called app. So when the page loads, Svelte will find this app element and inject the application inside it. Okay, and the last thing that we need to do is just load this JavaScript, right? How can we do that? We could bundle this and we could, deploy this code following the instructions that we've done in the previous streams. But for the sake of development, what I will do is just import everything, you know, the same approach that we're doing here. So I'll just copy this like that. And I'll put it probably here we can do. I'll put a defer, and also I'll take this URL. So this will be localhost source main.ts, and this will not work. Forget what I just said in the last 20 seconds, because this will not work because it's a TypeScript file. Never mind. What we need to do is build the application. So let's do it. Why the hell do I have warnings here? See. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll build this application. In the case of the Svelte project, we have a command that it's called build, and it will just bundle the files together and prepare them for running on the browser. And in this case, we got the code that it was generated. Here we have these assets with this index file like that. And the quickest thing that we could do is just pick this. I just put it here as a script. Okay, simpler. No need for any links. The only thing that I did was compile the code and just put it right in the Webflow site. That's it. No all overheads. Obviously, if the application is big enough, it will not fit in here because the code will be too long. And in that case, you will have to think about deploying JavaScript. So go ahead and check out the latest stream where we talked about deploying JavaScript code. But it's out of the scope of this stream. So let's do it again. Yay. Okay, so this is already working. Keep in mind, this is the Webflow site. So this is loading on the Webflow project. And when the page loads, it's rendering the application. And now we can, increment, we can show the warning, because now this HTML, it's being rendered by Svelte. Just have that in mind. The HTML is no longer coming from Webflow, it's coming from Svelte. Okay, if we inspect the HTML again, We will see all this JavaScript code, which is the application, but the HTML here, it's non-existing. We just have the div with the app, and that's it. In the case of the CSS, it's also coming from Webflow, and this is probably one of the biggest questions that people have. Like, okay, but where is the CSS going? Because here we added the CSS for development purposes here in this app.css, but we didn't add the CSS on the page. And the cool thing is that Webflow already injects the CSS for us. When you load a Webflow site, what's happening is that Webflow already adds this CSS file. So, any class, like, for example, the button, this button class comes from the CSS that Webflow is injecting. The warning, this app underscore warning, comes from the CSS that Webflow injects. So all of the styles are managed by Webflow, which means that I could just go to the template. I could take this and, for example, instead of red, I got tired of it. And perhaps I would like to have something bluish. You just pick this, we publish it, and Webflow will automatically load again the HTML, but with the new CSS file, which means that I've been able to tweak the styles without changing the code of the application. It was not necessary because the CSS it's coming from Webflow. Nice, cool. Okay, so
So
cool. Go ahead.
just to confirm this, so I can make updates to these buttons. I can change any styles I want, and they will be reflected. Now, what happens when I want to change something in the HTML? What happens when I want to reorder something? Maybe I want
Mm-hmm.
increment on the left and decrement on the right. What does that
Mm-hmm.
process look like? And some people are asking this too in different
Yep.
ways.
Yep. So let's try it. This is the template. I want now. Imagine that I'm not the developer and I'm somebody who's using the project. Like the client or whoever is managing this project, and the sites that they want to switch the buttons. Now they want to have the increment on the left and the decrement on the right. I just switch them. I'll publish this and let's see what happens. Let's just wait a couple seconds. I think we can close this. Okay, nothing changed. The template was switched, increment, decrement, but the application still remains the same. We have decrement, increment. And why is that? The reason is because the UI framework, it's managing the UI for you as we defined before, which means that the entire UI, all the HTML and JavaScript, it's hard coded on the code base and not in Webflow. This is very important because this is one of the main reasons why we don't directly use JavaScript frameworks like this one on client projects. It's cool when you need to build something on your own or your team, some team that can manage the code base. Imagine that I do want to switch this. I need to go to the code. I need to go to my app component and I need to pick these two elements and I need to switch them. Now I have increment and decrement. They are switched. And now I need to build the code, deploy the code again, and this newly deployed code, I need to put it in the Webflow project, you know, in the Webflow project, and then the UI will be different, So just keep in mind that this is one of the big downsides of using a JavaScript framework on a Webflow site, because maintenance, it's not non-technical friendly. It requires
Sure.
technical knowledge.
And this is a great use case for wrapping everything in an app wrapper. So you wouldn't have Svelte manage the UI of the entire page. Let's say you're just building a special web form. You would just have that form in your application wrapper, so only you would need to update that form specifically.
Yep.
Now,
We have an
Alex,
example of that
would
in. Uh, Sorry,
oh
go ahead.
great. And you would say now
The
this is how UI frameworks work in general. This is not just Felt specific, right? If we did something in
Mhm.
React or Vue, this similar type of process would happen where you'd have to
Yep,
take the
that's
HTML, serve it into the okay, excellent. And this is a nice
yep, and
example. Yeah, this is
this
an
is an
application
example.
here.
This
Cool.
this bidding here, it's a Svelte application. So if we load the page, let me just make a demonstration. I'll just disable the cache and I'll slow the loading of the page. Let's just put fast 3G. You will see that first the entire page loads without the application. Where is it? Okay, it was too fast. Let me do it again. Um, Everything loads, and once the page is ready, the application mounts on top of the page. That's that's a very that's a nice use case. You can see it here. There's nothing, and now the application appeared. Once it loaded. So for things like this, when where you have like a component that you want to create something that is hugely interactive, and building that using vanilla JavaScript or TypeScript would be kind of a pain in the ass. Relying on the JavaScript framework, it's something that it's really nice because I mean, coding all this interactivity directly with vanilla JavaScript, I can tell you that it would be a pain. It would be a huge pain. But with a framework like Svelte, it's very nice. It's simple enough, and it's more scalable and maintainable. Specifically because nobody from the team who's managing the client first docs needs to jump in here to make any changes. They don't. They don't rely on requiring to tweak this constantly like a client would need to do on a project. So be aware of this. You need to think about who's the end user who's going to be maintaining this project that has some of this UI framework logic on top of it.
Great. So now we've seen how these JavaScript framework libraries work, where it integrates with Webflow. We use it in Webflow, but it may not be the best use case for everything. I'd love to
Mhm.
bring up a comment from Caleb Rainey. Caleb is asking, are the progressive enhancement frameworks generally better for lighter weight projects that still allow you to speed up DOM manipulation, but don't worry as much about the back and forth of the HTML being served in that UI framework? So maybe you're shaking your head. Yes, these progressive enhancement frameworks, that's what is a little bit better for Webflow in lighter use cases.
But yeah, and honestly, most of the use cases are best fit for a progressive enhancement framework. The reason is because opposite to this bad React View example that we could show here, a progressive enhancement framework will use the UI that exists in Webflow. So let's recap for a second. In Svelte, when we publish this, the page is actually blank. There's nothing. The JavaScript framework loads and it renders everything on the page, which means that people maintaining this project, they don't have any freedom to moving layouts, switching stuff, things like that. On a progressive enhancement framework, what you have is the logic built on top of the existing UI. This is very important, and I have an example here to show you. And I thought that I could be showing this to you, and I probably can, but I will need a second for that. So I I had another example. We just have 5 minutes, so I'll just walk you through it, and perhaps we could do a stream for that in another time, because I think
And
that people will have a lot of questions. Go
we're
ahead.
not going to
Sorry.
cut off right at the 5 minutes. So let's make sure that we do a full walkthrough of implementing some of
Okay.
this, just so I don't want to cut it off and keep people guessing. So I think after we do this implementation, that's when we can end the stream. So stay with us here.
Okay. Okay. So the progressive enhancement, and sorry, I lost you. I have a lot of windows open. Okay. The progressive enhancement, it's just taking your existing UI and adding the interactivity on top of it. So it's like an extraction of vanilla JavaScript, like the same that you would do just coding by hand. You know, query the DOM element that has the count, and then also query the DOM element that has the button, and then listen for click events on the button, and then increment the count, and then take the count and render the new count value on the count element. All these instructions that are what I just did was explain how to create an app in an imperative way. It's hard to pronounce. Imperative way. How? Come on. Um, Instead of doing it, they just rely on a more declarative way, where you just say increment the count, and that's it. And the framework manages for you everything. You know, um, and in this case, we have an example using Petit View. Petit View, instead of what I did of copying the HTML and putting it in a separate code base and then working everything like that in there, Petit View, what it does is you have an element and you can define things like, for example, this count. It's defined like that because it's a variable, and Petit View already detects it. The buttons, you can add directives like, for example, on click, increment, on click, decrement, and this show only if the count is more than 5. So you can see that we have a bunch of directives that are built in the elements instead of the HTML built in the framework itself. And I would love to show this, but I just lost the code base. But give me a second, because I think that if we have, let's say, 10 more minutes, do we? Okay, in that case, we can do it. Let's go. And I'm messing up. Let's just create a new code base and do it right away, super quick. I'll just use this template, and I'll just do it here. And we'll say stream petit view like that. Let's make it public. I'm using our
And
developer starter for people who
that's
doesn't
exactly
know.
what I was going to say. Yeah, if you don't know about our developer starter, go back a few episodes. We talk about setting it up, but that's exactly what Alex is doing right here.
Thank you. Okay, I'm cloning the repo. You're not seeing it, but almost there. And okay, we have everything. Let me just fit my screen here. Okay, so we have the starter here. Because it's a progressive enhancement, instead of having a specific repository with all the tooling for that framework, this framework is just like a library, something that you can install in your project, and that's it. So what I'll do is, first I will install all the dependencies, and I will also install Petit View. Stay with me. Petit Install Petit View like that. Now we can start coding. So I'll just take this index file. I'll just remove everything. Yeah, let's remove everything. And let's just say that we want to, from Petit View, we want to create an app. And we'll say that we create this app, and inside this app, again, I'm not teaching you about using petit view. I'm just doing a quick demo. What we'll have is a state, and this is a count, and we'll have a couple functions. Will be increment like that, and it'll just increment the count and decrement like that, and we'll take the count and we will decrement the count like that. Comma, comma, done. Okay, so we've defined the app. You can see that I'm not hard coding any HTML. We're just relying on the framework itself, you know. And what we'll say is, I want to mount this app on an element that has an ID of app, and this is just for reference. We're saying that go ahead and add this logic on top of an existing UI that has an ID of app. So that's what I'm doing. Okay. So one thing that you need to have in mind is that for this specific framework, the Petit View and also for Alpine.js, both are pretty similar. They rely on the attributes that you have on the page. So, well, attributes or templating like that. So this attribute, it's already detecting that this button should be calling the increment function on click. This button should be calling the decrement function on click. And this element should be only be displayed when the count is greater than 5. So we're adding this logic in the UI, not in the code. So what I'll do is I'll just set this on development mode like that. And I'll just pick this. You're not seeing it, but you will see in a second. And I'll add a script here. Source like that. And I add the source. And again, I'm not deploying the code. I'm just using localhost for now. I'm serving the code from my computer for development purposes. Okay, cool. So that's it. Let's publish this, and hopefully, I think it should work. Let's see. I think that I should close stuff. Yeah, it is. Cool. Okay, so you can see that it's working. This has some upsides and downsides, but the biggest benefit of a progressive enhancement framework in the case of, in the ecosystem of Webflow is that the UI is still here. So if I take now these buttons and I decide to switch them and I publish this will work. This will not be broken because, the framework, it's not hard coding the HTML. So let's wait a second. Let's do it again. And now we have the increment on the left and the decrement on the right. So the HTML, it's done. It's tied to the Webflow side. But I know that people will have a lot of questions, but I would like to mention the biggest downside of this because people needs to be aware of it. Okay, and then I think that we can just answer any questions that people have. There's one big, big, big downside of this that you need to be aware of. As you saw, the logic for clicking the buttons, showing this, rendering the count, everything, it's in the UI. So this logic, it's inside an attribute. So when maintaining this project, if you have a big complex application, it will start getting very hard to understand what the hell is going on. Because maybe you have an element that it's hidden and it has some logic in an attribute and you don't identify that logic. Maybe you have some logic that it's like that, but instead of being super short like this, it's, or like that, and like that, and like that. And you start having a lot of logic that it's built in attributes and pieces of UI scattered all around the project that you need to be aware of. And this is the biggest downside of it. This is why building big complex application, perhaps it's also not a big, you know, I would not recommend building big complex applications for that. And that's why sometimes you need to assess if it's worth it building that just specifically in a JavaScript framework instead of just having everything in Webflow. And having said that, maybe we could do some spoiler on something that I've been working on, which is called something that we've named Sweet. It's it's a progressive enhancement framework that it's built specifically for Webflow sites, and you can think of the best of both worlds. All the code it's entirely in the code base for the logic, so there is no logic in attributes. So everything is more maintainable, but at the same time, the HTML it's the one that it's being served by Webflow. So I've tried to pick the best of both worlds and create a new framework. But at this moment, I don't have much to show you because everything that I wanted to show it's currently broken. So I would like to not show anything and just hype people a little bit, and just be aware that perhaps in the upcoming months we will see something that it's Finsweet based, a tool that we will be using for building the applications that we create for our clients. But that's it. I don't want to be keep saying stuff without showing anything. Whew, that was a lot of
Nice.
talking.
Yeah, that was a lot of talking. Really nice overview
Yeah.
here. And we have a couple of final questions that I think are really important that I'm also very curious about. If you've been watching from the beginning of this stream or even halfway through, you're probably thinking, wow, neither of these options are perfect. The progressive web app, the progressive one, not that convenient. The UI, not that convenient. There's it, and the
There's
reason
always
is they
something.
were not built for Webflow, right? These frameworks were not built for Webflow, and Webflow was not built to integrate these frameworks. So that's why Alex is building something to actually have some type of marriage between these two technologies and these two thought processes. I really want to bring up questions.
Yeah. Go
It's
ahead.
said really well by Sammy here. Darren also has the same question. Alex, is there a way? Well, first, let me read Sammy's question. What if for a UI framework usage, you build all of the HTML inside Webflow and use classes and IDs as references in your code base to rely on the framework only with JavaScript logic part? So this is saying, how do we not, is there a better way than just copying that code back and forth between the application inside your code editor and Webflow? Is there some way to better communicate while using React and Svelte and Vue?
No, those frameworks are specifically built to manage the rendering of the elements themselves. So this means that you can't create well, you can, but in a very hacky way. And actually, it was the first version that I created of the Suite framework. It was just based on Svelte because I was using the reactivity model that it has to query the DOM and doing stuff. But I decided to just go and create everything from scratch. But that's a different topic. These UI frameworks are specifically designed for creating the UI for you. That's why they are called UI frameworks, or they have many other names. But they need the HTML. When coding this app, not this one, this app of Svelte, Svelte requires me to add some HTML to know what the hell is going on with the UI. Svelte it's not meant for querying in DOM elements. That being said, Vue is. If you want to see something between both worlds, it would be Vue. But at the same time, I would say that it has the same downsides of PT Vue. if you use it on the Webflow project, because Vue it uses a templating system, so it relies on templates, and you can use the existing templates of the page, which is basically the same as PT Vue. Um, but you will find that the framework it's not meant for that. I don't recommend that you go that route. If you want to work directly with in DOM elements, so something that is already existing on the page when the page loads, I recommend that you either use vanilla JavaScript or you use a progressive enhancement framework like Petit Vue, Alpine.js, or eventually in the future, I hope, Sweet.js or whatever we call it. So yeah, stay tuned. And I see people asking for estimated date, you know, and I won't say that. I'm sorry, but this is something that I'm just building for fun, kind of, myself, and as an investment for Finsweet to improve our development process. So right now, this is something that some efforts that I'm taking for our company, not for open sourcing it. Although we could discuss open sourcing in the future, but uh, don't expect any specific date.
Nice. Yeah, that's always the right answer. But it's coming. I feel every few months that we have a nice little update to that, and as you can see, we're very invested in this type of technology. So let's bring up this comment from Demetrius. I think this is a good way to start ending this episode. Demetrius asks, because I've fallen in love with vanilla JavaScript, I'm still wondering if generating more complex HTML structures by hard coding them into JS file is the only way. Am I doing something wrong? And I like to add to this question by saying, if you're writing JavaScript on the page to do what you need to do, when do you reach that point where you say, hey, now it's time for Petit Vue, or now it's time for Svelte? When do you get to that tipping point where you have to actually now go out of writing JavaScript inside Webflow to something else?
Well, I mean, we're currently building very complex apps using just vanilla TypeScript. And the reason is because, as I said, the downsides of all the approaches were not enough for us to marry a specific framework. That's why I'm creating another one. So right now we're building pretty complex applications in Webflow. Obviously, you need to know what the hell you're doing, because when you're building very complex things using vanilla, you need to be very organized. You need to know, you need to try to, you're kind of creating your own framework at the same time, because you're trying to not repeat yourself and doing things in an optimized way. So that's one thing that you need to have in mind. Another thing that you need to have in mind is that you always have to think of the end user. I can assume probably that most people who's watching us right now, it's people from agencies or freelancers who are building projects for clients. So you need to think about the clients. It's not usually something good to hard code stuff on the code base if a client is going to manage that project afterwards. Because then the client will come and ask you, hey, I want to switch these buttons. I want to change this. I want to change that. And they will require somebody who knows coding. So, an approach that we always take when building the projects, even if it's vanilla TypeScript, doesn't matter. Um, we never hard code anything on the page. We always work with what's on the page. Imagine, for example, imagine, for example, a list of elements, you know, perhaps blog posts, whatever, random. And you want to, with JavaScript, you want to display multiple cards of blog posts, multiple postcards. Instead of hard coding the HTML, what you would do is you create a template on Webflow, and then you load the page with the template on the page. Because then with JavaScript, you can query that template, you can clone the template, and you can just work with whatever was published in the Webflow project. You can see a great example of this if you check out the API videos for attributes that I created a couple months ago. There are a couple videos talking about how to load elements from external APIs and integrate them in attributes. And we're taking that approach. We're creating templates, placeholders, and then we're working with them instead of hard coding HTML on the page, because that's not maintainable by a client or whoever it's maintaining the project. So always have this in mind. Always have the end user in mind when coding anything in Webflow.
This was a great episode. I know I learned a lot here. If
Nice.
you are listening right now, live or in the future, and you got some value from this episode, give the video a like, share it with a friend, come and hang out next week. I think this is a really important series for a lot of people. And you're not going to be able to build an app in a week. You're not going to be an expert JavaScript developer in a month. This is an ongoing process. So when you start picking up a little bit of these topics week by week by week, in a few months, it will make a lot more sense. And the reason I love coming to these build days and being a part of it is because I learn so much just from watching how this works. So thank you so much. We're getting some great comments. Gabe, let's bring these comments up. Ben, thank you so much. Really appreciate that comment. Sammy, one last word. Thanks for your contribution in trying to enhance Webflow's horizons. Of course, we will always be doing that. Caleb, super helpful. Thank you. We appreciate it. Joseph Bates, love it. Thank you. Kai, of course. John Agan, I
Hey.
think maybe one of our most favorite employees at Webflow. John is a really great person, dev relations at Webflow. Thank you for coming. And great. Thank you all for being a part of Build Day. We will be back next Friday. I don't know what we're talking about, but we're talking
I
about
think
something
next
good.
Friday, I checked it before. It was, oh shoot, I forgot. It
Yeah,
was
we don't
cool.
know. It's scheduled.
Yeah.
It's scheduled. It's going to be good. So
Yeah.
definitely next Friday, 9 Eastern, you got to be there. And I, right now, when I close this computer, I'm going to be off to State of Flow. So if you cannot go to State of Flow in person, if you are not here in Florida, make sure you join the virtual event. Rymar, Colleen, they'll all be posting about that. It's going to be a great, great event. So thank you all for being here live. Alex, final words to the aspiring technical people in the audience.
Keep trying stuff yourselves. Go ahead. Everything that we said here, try to do it yourself. Try to create a Svelte application. Try to create some basic PT view app. Just go ahead, test stuff. Yeah. And have fun with it. And thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon and have a great weekend.